The wind howls around the inside of the cathedral. You walk towards the door to step outside when the wind stops and everything suddenly becomes silent. You walk ahead and hear something coming from the roof. You look up and notice something falling. It's a person. You panic and move out of the way. The body crashes to the floor and then disappears. Welcome to Ghost Tales by the Fireside. I'm your host, Clem Dalloway, and this episode is about the glorious Lincoln Cathedral. A beautiful building with an interesting history and plenty of ghost stories. But first of all, I'd like to introduce you to another podcast. Let Me Tell You a Scary Story is a paranormal podcast hosted by Anna Rose, who reads out true-life creepy stories every Friday. These stories have happened to ordinary people all over the world and simply cannot be explained. They range from ghostly hauntings, glitch in the matrix tales, unexplained time lapses, alien sightings, possession, near misses, demons, doppelgangers, stalkers, true crime, and much more. Not only this, Anna is an award-winning voiceover artist and is sure to hook you in with her excellent, smooth storytelling voice. So close the blinds, turn off the lights, snuggle under that quilt and enjoy Let Me Tell You a Scary Story, found on any podcast listening platform. After the Battle of Hastings in 1066, the Norman King William the Conqueror found himself fighting rebellious Saxons who still opposed him. In response, he built castles all over England to show off his power. One of these castles was in Lincoln. The construction of Lincoln Cathedral started in 1072, after the parish was granted to Remigius de Ficamp, who was a Benedictine monk and a supporter of William the Conqueror. It was built on the site of a previous church. The cathedral was completed in 1092, the same year when Remigius died. He died on the 7th of May, and the cathedral was consecrated just days later on the 11th of May. The consecration was taken by the newly appointed bishop, Robert Blowett, who was also known as the swineherd of the Stow, as it was known that he took part in revelry, drinking and being with women. A figure of Bishop Blowett stands on the northernmost spire. Local legend says that at times his horn can be heard being blown from within the cathedral. In 1124, a fire broke out and the timber roof was completely destroyed. It was rebuilt by Bishop Alexander, who also expanded the cathedral. But after an earthquake in 1185, the cathedral was almost destroyed. The earthquake was one of the largest recorded in England's history, reaching a magnitude of over 5. Only the lower part of the west end and its 2 towers are the only parts of the original cathedral that survived. In 1215, the Bishop of Lincoln, Hugh of Wells, was one of the signatories of the Magna Carta, and one of the 4 only remaining copies of the document was held at the cathedral. It's now held securely in Lincoln Castle. In 1235, the righteous Bishop, Grosseteste, noticed that most of the clergy were far from spiritual. They were performing acts of debauchery and other sins. In 1237, during one of his sermons, he spoke to the congregation about the unruly clergy. He said, "But were I to be silent on these matters, surely the very stones themselves would fall." Moments later, the walls of the cathedral started to shake, and the central tower collapsed, killing several members of the congregation. It's believed that there were some mistakes in the construction of the tower, but the people of those times saw it as a sign that the cathedral was unpure. The cathedral was then closed for a while to be cleansed. In August 1255, an 8-year-old boy who had been missing for around 2 months was found dead in a well in Lincoln. This caused a blood libel, where Jews were blamed for the ritual killing of Christian boys. 18 people from the Jewish community were arrested, being accused of his abduction, torture and murder. All 18 were hanged. The boy became known as Little Saint Hugh. Little Hugh was seen as a martyr, and many people from all over the country visited Lincoln, and the cathedral benefited from this. Little Hugh was mentioned in Geoffrey Chaucer's A Prioress's Tale, and a ballad was written at some point that was collected by the well-known collector of folk songs, James Francis Child, that is included in his famous Child Ballads collection. In the latter part of the 12th century, a vicar of the cathedral murdered a subdean while he was at prayer. The subdean's servants found the vicar and took revenge by tying him to a horse and dragging him to Canwick Hill, where he was then hanged. Between 1307 and 1311, the central tower was rebuilt with a tall lead-encased wooden spire, which is believed to have reached a height of 525 feet. This would have made it the world's tallest building at that time. After the rebuild of the cathedral, a stone imp was carved into a pillar in the angel choir. A legend tells the story of 2 imps that were blown into the cathedral by a supernatural wind so that they could see the completed building. One of the imps was too scared to enter, so he sat on a gargoyle above the judgment porch. But the other flew straight in and sat on the pillar at the angel choir. The story says that the angels surrounded him and turned both of them into stone forever. The supernatural wind is still said to haunt the cathedral. Between 1885 and 1910, Bishop King held office at Lincoln Cathedral. He was very well known across the city and was respected for his kindness to the people. In his younger days, when he was a curate of a church in a small village, he experienced some strange phenomena which saved his life. It was a wet, windy night, and King had just arrived home. As he was removing his wet clothing, he heard someone banging on the front door. The housekeeper answered the door to find a man who seemed to be panicking. The man went on to explain that there had been a terrible accident involving a farmer who lives a few miles away, and that he needed the curate to perform the last rites for him. He put his wet clothing back on and headed out towards the farm, but as he left, there was no sign of the man who knocked the door. After walking across wet fields in the pouring rain and high winds, he arrived at the farmhouse and knocked on the door. The door was opened by the farmer who was allegedly involved in the accident, who seemed to be in perfect health. The curate explained why he was there, and the farmer was confused, as he hadn't been involved in any accident and was in great health. The curate left the farmhouse and went home, leaving the incident as a mystery. Years later, Curate King moved on to another church in a nearby town. When he was called up to give the last rites at the local hospital, the dying man asked the curate if he remembered him, but he didn't. After the man told him his name and explained who he was, the curate remembered him. A small-time criminal from the small village where Curate King was based many years ago. The man asked him, "Do you remember that night when you got the message about the farmer who had an accident? It was me who brought the message, and my plan was to kill and rob you after you left the house. You priests usually carry items that are valuable, which would have made me a tidy profit. But when I noticed that you had a friend with you, I backed off." King remembered the night very well and knew that he'd been alone on the journey to the farmhouse. Perhaps it was a guardian that saved his life. There are many towers and spires at the cathedral, which are now permanently closed due to the amount of suicides that have occurred over the centuries from people jumping to their deaths. Many people have reported seeing the replay of some of these suicides, but the bodies are never to be found once they've hit the ground. Up until the 1820s, suicide was seen as a sin, and the victims were refused burial on consecrated ground. They were buried near public highways, usually at a crossroads, and a stake was put through their bodies to prevent the spirit of the deceased from rising and causing trouble. In the 1970s, a local newspaper reported of a man who had witnessed a human head rolling down from the cathedral. A ghost of a member of clergy has been seen falling from the roof many times. A monk, 2 men and a woman are also witnessed often at varying times of the year. There are 2 great stained glass windows, which were made in the 13th century, that face each other. One at the north transept, known as the Dean's Eye, and one in the south, known as the Bishop's Eye. North represents the devil, and south represents the Holy Spirit. They were described by St. Hugh of Lincoln as the 2 eyes of the church. It's believed that the Bishop's Eye was completed by the apprentice of the person who was commissioned to make the window, as the master was busy with other jobs. The legend says that when the master returned, he realized that the apprentice's work was much better than his own. He was so upset that he jumped from the terrarium near to the window and took his own life. People claim that his bloodstains are still on the spot where his body landed, and that his ghost reenacts that fatal jump every year on the anniversary. Thank you for listening to Ghost Tales by the Fireside. If you enjoy this channel, please subscribe and give me a thumbs up, it's very appreciated. You can find more information about episodes on the website www.ghosttales.co.uk. Log into the Facebook page, facebook.com, Ghost Tales Podcast. You can also find me on Instagram at Ghost Tales Podcast. This podcast will be out monthly and is available on most podcast platforms. All music, research, writing, production, art and sound effects are all my own work.